Chapter 1. A Young Girl's Dream. Sophia was born on May 2nd, 1729, in a small German town called Stettin. Her family was noble, but not very rich. They lived in a large house with high walls and quiet halls. Her father was strict and proud. Her mother was ambitious. She wanted more for her daughter. Sophia was a curious child. She loved to read books and listen to stories. Her favorite tales were about brave heroes and wise queens. She imagined herself as one of them. One day, she thought, I will do something great. I don't know how, but I will. As a young girl, Sophia did not see much of the world outside her home. She learned French, dancing, and religion. Her tutors said she was smart, but she was also playful. She would often daydream while looking out of the window. What is my future? She wondered. When Sophia was 14, her life took an unexpected turn. One evening, her mother received a letter. It came from Russia. The Empress of Russia, Elizabeth, was looking for a bride for her nephew, Peter. Peter was next in line to be emperor. Empress Elizabeth wanted him to marry someone noble, young, and healthy. Sophia's mother saw an opportunity. "This is it!" her mother said with excitement. "You could marry Peter. You could become a queen." Sophia felt a mix of emotions. The idea of leaving her home frightened her, but the thought of a new life also excited her. She stayed quiet, listening as her mother planned their journey. The decision was made quickly. Sophia and her mother packed their things. The trip to Russia was long and cold. They traveled in a carriage through snowy forests and empty fields. At night, Sophia could not sleep. She thought about the palace, the prince, and the empress. What would they be like? Would they like her? She had so many questions, but no answers. When they arrived in Russia, Sophia was amazed. The capital city, St. Petersburg, was grand and full of life. There were carriages on the streets, beautiful buildings, and people dressed in fine clothes. Everything was bigger and brighter than she had ever imagined. Sophia and her mother were taken to the Winter Palace. The palace was enormous, with golden halls and high ceilings. Servants led them to Empress Elizabeth. The Empress was kind but commanding. She looked at Sophia carefully. "She is young and pretty," Elizabeth said. "She will do." Sophia felt nervous but hopeful. The Empress decided that Sophia needed to change. She had to learn the Russian language and the Orthodox religion. Her name would also change. From now on, she would be called Catherine. It was a name that sounded strong and royal. Catherine worked hard to please the Empress. She studied Russian every day. At first, the words felt strange in her mouth, but she practiced until she could speak fluently. She also learned the traditions of the Russian court. Catherine smiled and bowed, always careful to follow the rules. Her mother, however, was not as careful. She argued with the Russian nobles. She annoyed the Empress. Soon, the Empress sent her away. Catherine was left alone in a foreign land. She missed her home and her friends, but she stayed focused. She knew she had to succeed. Then Catherine met Peter. He was not what she expected. Peter was childish and rude. He liked playing with toy soldiers more than talking to people. Catherine tried to be kind to him, but he often ignored her. She felt lonely and disappointed. "Is this my future?" she thought. Despite this, Catherine did not give up. She knew she had a chance to do something great. She told herself, "I will not let this stop me. I will make my own path." One day, Catherine received news from home. Her father had died. She cried alone in her room. She wanted to go back, but she knew she couldn't. She had to stay strong. Her dream of greatness gave her courage. "I will honor my family," she whispered to herself. The wedding was planned for 1745. Catherine was just 16. She wore a grand dress with jewels and a long veil. The church was filled with candles and music. Nobles from across Russia came to watch. Catherine looked calm, but inside, she felt a storm of emotions. She was excited, nervous, and unsure of what her future would hold. After the ceremony, Catherine was officially part of the Russian royal family. She was now the Grand Duchess of Russia. But her journey was just beginning. She still had much to learn, many battles to fight, and a dream to fulfill. As Catherine sat in her new chambers that night, she stared at the stars outside her window. This is only the start, she thought. Her heart beat fast with a mix of fear and hope. She didn't know what the future held, but she was ready to face it. Catherine's story was about to take her to incredible heights. Her life would be full of challenges, love, and power. But for now, she was just a young girl, far from home, holding on to her dream of greatness. Chapter 2. The New Bride. Sophia was no longer Sophia. She had a new name, Catherine. It was a Russian name, chosen by Empress Elizabeth. Catherine was now part of the Russian royal family. She wore elegant dresses, learned the Russian language, and followed the strict rules of the court. But behind the beautiful gowns and bright smiles, Catherine felt alone. Her husband, Peter, was very different from her. He was the heir to the throne, but he acted more like a boy than a leader. Peter loved to play with toy soldiers. He spent hours marching them across the floor of his room. He laughed loudly and made strange jokes. Catherine tried to talk to him, but he hardly listened. Peter also admired Prussia, Russia's enemy. He dressed like a Prussian soldier and spoke about Prussian kings. The Russian nobles frowned at this. They thought it was foolish. Catherine, too, found it strange. She wondered, how can he lead Russia if he loves another country more? The marriage was not what Catherine had hoped for. She had imagined a partnership, someone to share her dreams with. Instead, Peter ignored her. He often humiliated her in public, making rude remarks or laughing at her ideas. Catherine stayed calm, but inside she felt hurt. "I must be strong," she told herself. Catherine found comfort in books. She read about great rulers and philosophers. Her favorite authors spoke of justice, wisdom, and courage. They gave her hope. If they can achieve greatness, she thought, so can I. Life in the palace was dazzling but lonely. The Winter Palace was enormous, with golden halls, high ceilings, and glittering chandeliers. Balls and feasts filled the days, but Catherine felt out of place. The other nobles gossiped and schemed. Catherine was careful not to trust anyone too quickly. The Empress watched Catherine closely. Elizabeth was powerful and demanding. She expected Catherine to obey every rule. Catherine did her best to please her. She attended court events, smiled at nobles, and acted as a loyal wife to Peter. But she felt trapped. Her every move was judged. One day, Catherine became ill. She had a high fever and could hardly move. Doctors came to see her. They whispered about her condition, but their medicines did little to help. Peter visited her once. He stood by her bed, looking bored. "You'll get better soon," he said quickly before leaving. Catherine's heart ached. She realized how little he cared for her. Catherine recovered after many weeks. She decided to change her approach. She began to focus on herself and her future. She learned more about Russian culture, spoke to the people, and built her own network of allies. While Peter played with his toys, Catherine worked in silence. She was preparing for something bigger. The palace was filled with whispers. Nobles talked about Peter's strange behavior and Catherine's intelligence. Many began to see her as the stronger of the two. Catherine noticed this but said nothing. She kept her thoughts to herself. She understood that patience was key. As time passed, Catherine's loneliness deepened. She wanted love, but her marriage offered none. Peter had little interest in her as a person. He was more focused on his games and his admiration for Prussia. Catherine, however, refused to let this break her spirit. "I will find my own way," she thought. One winter evening, Catherine sat by a window. Snow covered the ground outside. The city of St. Petersburg looked cold and quiet. She thought of her home in Germany. She missed the familiar streets and warm faces of her childhood. Tears filled her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. "I cannot cry," she said to herself. "I must stay strong." Her strength began to show. At court, Catherine impressed others with her intelligence and grace. She spoke confidently, even when Peter acted foolishly. The nobles started to respect her. Some even came to her for advice. Catherine realized that she had a gift for leadership. Peter noticed Catherine's growing influence. He became jealous. He tried to embarrass her at court, but Catherine remained calm. She knew that anger would only make things worse. Instead, she smiled and spoke kindly. This made Peter even angrier. One day, Peter accused Catherine of not being loyal to him. She looked at him calmly and said, "I have always done my duty as your wife." Peter had no response. He stormed out of the room. Catherine's composure impressed the nobles. They whispered among themselves, "She is stronger than he is." Despite the cold marriage, Catherine found small moments of happiness. She loved riding horses and exploring the palace gardens. These moments reminded her of freedom. She often thought about the future. What kind of ruler will Peter be? She wondered. And what will happen to me? Catherine's relationship with the Empress was complicated. Elizabeth admired Catherine's intelligence, but also felt threatened by her charm. The Empress wanted Catherine to have a child, an heir to secure the throne. Catherine felt the pressure, but knew it would not solve her problems. A child might change my position, she thought, but it will not bring love. The palace was full of secrets. Servants carried messages. Nobles formed alliances. Catherine began to understand the game of power. She learned when to speak and when to stay silent. She knew that survival required both patience and strategy. Catherine's loneliness taught her resilience. She realized that she could not rely on others for happiness. She had to create her own path. She began to see herself not just as Peter's wife, but as a person with her own dreams and abilities. This thought gave her strength. As the years passed, Catherine grew more confident. She saw Peter's weaknesses and began to think about her own potential. I could do more, she thought. I could lead better. These thoughts stayed in her mind, quietly shaping her future. The palace, with all its splendor, became a place of reflection for Catherine. She understood the weight of her position and the challenges ahead. But she also knew that she had the courage to face them. Chapter 3. A Lonely Heart. Catherine's days at the Winter Palace were long and quiet. The halls were grand, filled with marble and gold, but they felt empty to her. She walked through the corridors, hearing only the echo of her footsteps. Despite the beauty around her, Catherine's heart felt heavy. She had hoped for companionship, for love, but her life with Peter was cold and distant. Peter spent his time playing games. He loved his toy soldiers more than anything else. Sometimes he even held mock battles with them, laughing loudly and ignoring everyone around him. Catherine tried to speak with him, to share her thoughts, but Peter always looked bored. He seemed to care little for her ideas, and this hurt her deeply. To escape her loneliness, Catherine turned to books. She loved to read. In the palace library, she found stories of great leaders and thinkers. She read about Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great, and the philosophers of the Enlightenment. These books opened her mind to new ideas. They gave her hope. If they could achieve greatness, she thought, so can I. Catherine spent hours in her room reading by candlelight. Her favorite books were about strong rulers who brought change to their lands. She admired their courage and wisdom. These stories inspired her. They made her believe that she was meant for more than a life of silence and waiting. At night, Catherine often lay awake in her bed. The room was dark, and the only sound was the wind outside her window. She thought about her future. What will become of me? She wondered. Am I just Peter's wife? Or is there something greater waiting for me? These questions filled her mind. She dreamed of a life where she could make her own decisions and lead with purpose. The court was a place of whispers and secrets. The nobles watched Catherine closely. Some admired her intelligence and grace. Others saw her as a threat. Catherine noticed their glances and overheard their gossip. She knew she had to be careful. One wrong move could ruin her. Despite the challenges, Catherine stayed strong. She began to plan quietly. She thought about how she could make herself more powerful. She knew she had to win the trust of the people around her. She started speaking to the servants and guards. She asked them about their lives and listened to their concerns. Slowly, she built connections. Catherine's curiosity extended beyond the palace. She wanted to understand Russia. She learned about the people, their traditions, and their struggles. She asked questions about the land and its history. Her interest made her different from Peter, who cared little for the country he was supposed to rule. The more Catherine learned, the more she believed in her own potential. She started to see herself as a leader. I can do more than sit and wait, she thought. I can make a difference. One evening, Catherine sat by the window in her room. The sky was dark, and the stars shone brightly. She opened her journal and began to write. Her thoughts flowed onto the page. She wrote about the changes she wanted to see in Russia. She dreamed of schools for children, better laws for the people, and a stronger country. Writing gave her a sense of purpose. But Catherine's life was not without pain. She missed her family in Germany. She missed the warmth of her childhood home. Sometimes she felt trapped in the palace, surrounded by people who did not understand her. These moments of sadness made her question her choices. Why did I come here? She asked herself. But deep down, she knew the answer. She had come for a chance at greatness. The Empress, Elizabeth, continued to watch Catherine. She saw Catherine's intelligence and charm, but she also saw her as a rival. Elizabeth wanted to remain the most powerful woman in Russia. She expected Catherine to stay in her place. Catherine knew this and acted carefully. She smiled politely and followed the rules, even when she felt frustrated. Peter's behavior grew worse. He drank heavily and spent his nights with his friends, ignoring Catherine even more. Sometimes he mocked her in front of others. Catherine felt humiliated but stayed silent. She knew that reacting would only make things harder for her. Instead, she focused on her own plans. One day, Catherine overheard two nobles talking. They spoke about Peter's unpopularity. Many people at court did not respect him. They thought he was childish and weak. Catherine listened quietly, pretending not to care. But inside, she felt a spark of hope. If Peter cannot lead, she thought, maybe I can. Catherine began to meet with people who shared her ideas. She spoke with philosophers and military leaders. She listened to their advice and shared her own thoughts. These conversations gave her confidence. She realized that she was not alone in her dreams. Others also wanted a stronger, better Russia. Despite her growing confidence, Catherine still faced challenges. The palace was filled with spies. Every word she spoke could be reported back to the Empress or Peter. Catherine had to be careful. She chose her allies wisely and kept her plans secret. One winter night, Catherine sat by the fireplace. The room was quiet, and the flames flickered softly. She thought about her life so far. She had come to Russia as a young girl with big dreams. Now, she was a woman with a vision for the future. I am stronger than I was before, she thought. But there is still so much to do. Catherine's loneliness never completely left her, but she learned to use it as a source of strength. Her nights alone gave her time to think and plan. Her books and journals became her companions. They reminded her of what was possible. As Catherine looked out at the snow-covered palace gardens, she made a silent promise to herself. I will not give up, she thought. I will find a way to make my life better. And one day, I will lead. Her journey was far from over. Catherine's heart was still lonely, but her spirit was strong. She knew that her future held both challenges and opportunities. She was ready to face them all. Chapter 4. A Dangerous Plan. In 1762, Peter became Emperor of Russia. The moment Catherine had feared and prepared for finally came. Peter's rise to power changed everything, but instead of uniting them, it pushed them further apart. Peter celebrated his new position with grand parties. He enjoyed the luxury of being emperor, but he paid little attention to the needs of his people. His actions upset many. He ended important alliances, disrespected Russian traditions, and spoke openly about his admiration for Prussia, Russia's enemy. This made him unpopular with the nobles and the army. Catherine watched quietly. She saw how Peter's behavior created enemies. He ruled carelessly, thinking no one would dare challenge him. But Catherine knew better. She could see the cracks forming in his support. Deep down, she knew this was her chance. One evening, Catherine sat in her chambers thinking. The air was cold, and the room was silent. She thought about Russia's future. Peter's reign was damaging the country. The people were unhappy, and the army was losing respect for their leader. If Peter continues like this, Catherine thought, Russia will suffer. Catherine's mind raced. She knew she had to act, but the risk was great. Overthrowing an emperor, her own husband, was dangerous. If she failed, it could mean her death. But if she succeeded, she could change everything. I must be careful, she whispered. Every step must be planned. To begin, Catherine needed allies. She started with the military. She knew that the soldiers held great power. Without their support, her plan would fail. Catherine spoke with key officers in the army. She listened to their frustrations and earned their trust. Slowly, she built a group of loyal supporters. Her closest ally was Grigory Orlov, a commander in the army and one of her trusted confidants. Orlov believed in Catherine's vision for Russia. Together, they began to lay the groundwork for her rise to power. Catherine told him, "We must move carefully. No one can know what we are planning." Catherine also sought support from the nobles. Many were unhappy with Peter's rule. They resented his decisions and his disrespect for Russian traditions. Catherine met with them in secret, speaking about her ideas for the country. She promised reforms and a better future. Her intelligence and charm won them over. Slowly, more people joined her side. But Peter was not blind to Catherine's growing influence. He became suspicious of her actions. He questioned her meetings and watched her closely. Catherine knew she had to stay calm. She continued to smile in public, pretending everything was fine. But behind closed doors, her plan was taking shape. The days grew more tense. The palace was filled with whispers and fear. Spies reported every move. Catherine knew that time was running out. She had to act before Peter discovered her plans. "We cannot wait any longer," she told Orloff. "The time is now." One early morning in June, Catherine made her move. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a pale light over St. Petersburg. Catherine met with her allies in secret. Soldiers loyal to her gathered outside the palace. They were ready to take action. Catherine addressed them with confidence. "We fight not for me, but for Russia," she said. "Peter has failed our country. Together, we can bring hope and strength to the people." Her words inspired them. The soldiers cheered, ready to follow her. Meanwhile, Peter was unaware of what was happening. He was at a nearby palace, enjoying a day of leisure. When news of Catherine's actions reached him, he panicked. He tried to rally his own forces, but it was too late. Many of his soldiers had already switched sides. They refused to fight against Catherine. As Catherine's army marched through the city, the people watched with excitement. They cheered her name, calling her their true leader. Catherine felt a surge of emotion. She had risked everything, and now the people were with her. But she knew the battle was not over yet. Peter fled the city, hoping to find safety. He sent messages begging for support, but no help came. Catherine's forces were too strong. Realizing he had no choice, Peter surrendered. He signed a document giving up the throne. Catherine was now the ruler of Russia. When she heard the news, Catherine felt a mix of relief and disbelief. She had done it. She had taken power from her own husband. But she also knew the weight of what she had done. Peter was sent to a distant palace under guard. Weeks later, he died under mysterious circumstances. Some whispered it was murder, but Catherine denied any involvement. Now, Catherine stood alone at the top. She was no longer the young girl who had come to Russia to marry a prince. She was an empress. The road to power had been dangerous and filled with risk, but she had succeeded. Still, she wondered, what happens next? Her journey was far from over. The crown was hers, but ruling Russia would bring new challenges. Catherine knew she had to prove herself, not just to the nobles and the army, but to the people. She had dreamed of this moment for years. Now, it was her time to lead. That night, Catherine walked through the halls of the palace. The same golden walls that had once felt like a prison now felt like her domain. She paused by a window and looked out at the city. The lights of St. Petersburg shone brightly against the dark sky. This is just the beginning, she thought. I will make Russia great. Her dangerous plan had worked, but Catherine understood the price of power. She had won the throne, but she had also made powerful enemies. She would need all her strength and wisdom to keep what she had fought so hard to gain. Chapter 5. The Coup. The summer of 1762 was warm and tense in St. Petersburg. The streets buzzed with rumors. People whispered about the Empress, Catherine, and the Emperor, Peter. Something was about to happen. The air felt heavy with suspense. Peter had been emperor for only a few months, but many disliked him. His admiration for Prussia and his careless decisions angered the nobles, the army, and even the common people. Catherine saw this. She knew it was her chance. She had waited patiently, and now she would act. It began early on the morning of June 28th. Catherine woke before the sun rose. Her heart raced as she dressed in a simple but elegant gown. She looked at herself in the mirror and took a deep breath. This was the moment she had prepared for. There was no turning back. Grigory Orlov, Catherine's trusted ally, arrived at the palace. He brought news that the soldiers were ready. They had pledged their loyalty to her. Catherine nodded, her face calm, but her hands trembling slightly. "Let us go," she said. Catherine and her allies rode to the barracks where the soldiers waited. As she entered, the men stood at attention. Catherine spoke to them, her voice clear and steady. "Russia needs strong leadership," she said. "The people deserve a ruler who loves this land and its traditions." The soldiers cheered. They believed in her. She was no longer just a wife or a noblewoman. She was their leader. From the barracks, Catherine marched into the streets of St. Petersburg. People gathered to see her. Some clapped, others shouted her name. "Catherine! Catherine!" The crowd grew larger with every step she took. The city seemed to come alive with excitement. Catherine smiled but stayed focused. She knew the real test was still ahead. Meanwhile, Peter was far from the city, relaxing at his summer palace. He had no idea what was happening. Servants brought him food and drink. He laughed and joked, unaware that his throne was slipping away. Catherine and her army moved quickly. They secured the city, taking control of key locations. The nobles who supported her spread the word. Catherine was now the true ruler of Russia. The people accepted her without question. To them, Peter was a failure. Catherine was their hope. When Peter finally heard the news, he was shocked. At first, he didn't believe it. "Catherine, leading an army?" he said with disbelief. But as more messages arrived, the truth became clear. He panicked. He tried to gather his own forces, but it was too late. Many of his soldiers had already joined Catherine. Peter fled, hoping to find safety. But Catherine's men were close behind. They surrounded him and demanded his surrender. With no other options, Peter gave up. He signed a document giving up the throne. The once proud emperor was now a prisoner. When Catherine heard that Peter had surrendered, she felt a wave of relief. but she also felt the weight of her actions. She had taken power from her own husband. It was a bold and dangerous move. Could she keep the throne? Would the people stay loyal? The next day, Catherine stood before the Russian court. She wore a royal gown and a crown that sparkled in the sunlight. She looked calm and strong, but inside, she felt a mix of emotions. This was the moment she had dreamed of, but it was also the beginning of a great responsibility. In her first speech as Empress, Catherine promised to protect Russia. "I will work for the good of this great nation," she said. "Together, we will build a brighter future." Her words were met with applause. The nobles bowed, and the soldiers cheered. Catherine had won their support, but she knew this was only the beginning. Peter was taken to a small palace under guard. He spent his days in silence, thinking about his fall from power. Weeks later, news came that Peter had died. Some said it was an accident. Others believed it was murder. Catherine denied any involvement, but the rumors lingered. They cast a shadow over her reign. Despite this, Catherine moved forward. She worked tirelessly to secure her position. She met with generals, diplomats, and nobles, ensuring their loyalty. She also reached out to the people, showing them that she cared about their struggles. Her intelligence and charm won many over, but not everyone supported her. Some still questioned her right to rule. Catherine knew she had to prove herself. She began to make changes in Russia. She focused on education, the economy, and the military. These actions strengthened her position and showed the world that she was a capable leader. In the months following the coup, Catherine often reflected on what she had done. She thought about the risks she had taken and the sacrifices she had made. She remembered the fear she felt as she marched through the streets and the relief when Peter surrendered. It had been a dangerous journey, but she had succeeded. Catherine also thought about her future. She wanted to be more than just a ruler. She wanted to be a great empress, someone who would be remembered for centuries. She knew this would not be easy, but she was ready for the challenge. "I have come this far," she thought. "I will not stop now." One evening, Catherine stood on the balcony of the Winter Palace. The city stretched out before her, its lights twinkling in the darkness. The Neva River flowed quietly, reflecting the moonlight. Catherine felt a sense of peace. She had claimed the throne, but she knew her work was far from over. Her journey to power had been dangerous and full of uncertainty, but it had also shown her strength. She was no longer the lonely girl who had come to Russia all those years ago. She was Catherine the Great, the Empress of Russia. And so, her reign began. The future was unknown, but Catherine was determined. She had faced fear, doubt, and betrayal. Yet, she had emerged victorious. Now, she would write the next chapter of her story, one of courage, leadership, and greatness. Before we begin Chapter 6, a quick note for our listeners. You're currently listening to this audiobook on Woo English. Remember, this content is specially made for Woo English listeners only. If you're hearing it on any other channel, it may be a violation of Woo English's rights. Please ensure you're tuned into the right source to fully enjoy and respect this audiobook journey. Now, let's continue the story. Chapter 6. The New Empress. Catherine was now the Empress of Russia. Her journey to the throne had been hard, but her work was just beginning. She wanted to make Russia stronger and better for its people. Her dream was to bring progress, education, and fairness to the country. But she knew it wouldn't be easy. The first task Catherine faced was gaining the trust of the nobles. Many of them were powerful and proud. They did not like change. Catherine needed their support to rule, but she also wanted to introduce new ideas. This created a delicate balance. I must be wise, she thought. I must win their respect. Catherine began by learning more about Russia's problems. She met with advisors, scholars, and farmers. She listened to their concerns and asked questions. What she learned surprised her. Many people in Russia were poor. Farmers struggled to feed their families. The roads were bad, and the cities were crowded and dirty. Catherine wanted to help. Her first step was education. Catherine believed that knowledge could change lives. She wanted children to go to school and learn to read and write. She worked with teachers to create new schools. These schools were open to more children, not just the wealthy. Catherine also invited thinkers from other countries to share ideas. She believed Russia could learn from the world. But not everyone agreed with her plans. Some nobles thought Catherine's ideas were too modern. They worried that educated people would demand more rights. This scared the nobles, who wanted to keep their power. They whispered among themselves, wondering if Catherine was too ambitious. Catherine did not stop. She moved on to laws. Russia's legal system was old and unfair. Poor people were often punished harshly while the rich escaped justice. Catherine wanted new laws that were fair to everyone. She spent long hours writing and studying. She read about laws in other countries and tried to take the best ideas. In 1767, Catherine called for a special meeting. She invited people from all over Russia to share their thoughts about new laws. This meeting, called the Legislative Commission, was groundbreaking. It included not only nobles, but also farmers, merchants, and soldiers. Catherine wanted to hear everyone's voice. At the meeting, Catherine gave a powerful speech. "We must create a stronger Russia," she said. "This will not happen by chance. It will take hard work and new ideas." Many people applauded her vision. They were inspired by her words. But others remained silent, unsure of her plans. While Catherine worked on reforms, she also faced opposition. Some nobles tried to block her ideas. They did not want to lose their privileges. Others spread rumors about her personal life, hoping to weaken her reputation. Catherine heard the whispers, but ignored them. She stayed focused on her goals. One of her biggest challenges came from the serfs, who were peasants tied to the land they farmed. Serfs had few rights and lived very hard lives. Catherine wanted to help them, but she needed the nobles' support. She could not free the serfs without causing a revolt among the landowners. This was a painful dilemma for Catherine. She wanted change, but she knew she had to move slowly. To improve farming, Catherine introduced new tools and methods. She encouraged farmers to grow different crops, like potatoes, which were more nutritious. She also gave landowners advice on better farming techniques. These changes helped Russia produce more food, but it took time for everyone to see the results. Catherine's reforms reached the cities too. She worked to improve public health and build hospitals. She focused on making life cleaner and safer for everyone. In Moscow, she introduced streetlights and cleaned the water supply. These small changes had a big impact on the people. Despite her hard work, Catherine often felt alone. She missed having someone to share her thoughts with. Her position as empress came with great responsibility, but also great isolation. At night, she would sit in her study, reading letters and writing in her journal. She reminded herself why she was doing this. I must stay strong, she thought. Russia depends on me. Catherine's strength and determination earned her many admirers. Poets wrote about her wisdom. Artists painted her portrait, showing her as a confident and powerful ruler. But Catherine did not let this praise distract her. She knew there was still much to do. One winter evening, Catherine received news of unrest in the countryside. Some farmers were angry about taxes and land. They blamed Catherine for their struggles. Catherine felt troubled. She wanted to help, but the problems were complex. How can I make life better for everyone? She wondered. She decided to travel across Russia to see the problems herself. Catherine visited towns, villages, and farms. She spoke with the people, listened to their concerns, and observed their struggles. These journeys gave her a clear understanding of Russia's needs. They also showed the people that their empress cared. Back in the palace, Catherine began working on new plans. She focused on trade, hoping to make Russia richer. She built new roads and canals to help goods travel more easily. These projects created jobs and connected distant parts of the empire. However, not all of Catherine's plans succeeded. Some reforms were too expensive or too ahead of their time. Others faced strong resistance from the nobles. But Catherine did not give up. She believed that even small changes could lead to a brighter future. Catherine also had to think about Russia's place in the world. She wanted to make Russia stronger and more respected. She worked to build alliances with other countries and expand the empire's borders. These actions made Russia a powerful force in Europe. Through it all, Catherine kept writing and learning. She wrote letters to famous philosophers and asked for their advice. She wanted to be a ruler who combined wisdom and action. Her passion for knowledge inspired many, but it also made her enemies jealous. Despite the challenges, Catherine believed in her mission. She wanted to leave Russia better than she had found it. She knew the road was long, but she was ready to walk it. If I can make life even a little better, she thought, then my efforts will be worth it. By the end of her first years as Empress, Catherine had accomplished much. She had built schools, improved farming, and brought new ideas to Russia. But she also faced the reality of politics. Not everyone wanted change. The path to greatness was full of obstacles, but Catherine was determined to keep going. As she looked out over the city one evening, the lights of St. Petersburg twinkled like stars. Catherine felt a quiet pride. She had started something important. The question now was, how far could she take it? Chapter 7. Love and Scandal. Catherine was not only a ruler, but also a woman with a passionate heart. Her life at court was full of duties, decisions, and challenges, but she often felt lonely. The pressures of ruling an empire left little room for personal happiness. Still, Catherine sought companionship in the people around her. Some became trusted advisors. Others became much closer. Among her companions were several men who played important roles in her life. Catherine was open about her relationships. She did not hide them, nor did she apologize. To her, love was a personal matter. She believed in living freely and making her own choices. But in the royal court, nothing remained private for long. Whispers began to spread about Catherine's personal life. Nobles gossiped in the palace halls. Servants shared rumors in the kitchens. "Did you hear?" they would say. "Catherine has a new favorite?" These whispers often grew into wild stories, filled with exaggerations and lies. Catherine knew about the rumors, but chose to ignore them. She had more important things to do. One of Catherine's closest companions was Grigory Orlov. He had helped her during the coup that made her empress. Strong, brave, and loyal, Orlov became Catherine's lover and advisor. Their relationship lasted for many years. Catherine trusted him and valued his support. But even with Orlov, her position as ruler came first. She would not let love weaken her leadership. Over time, Catherine and Orlov grew apart. The demands of ruling an empire took much of her time. Catherine also realized that Orlov lacked the political skills she needed in a partner. Their bond remained strong, but their romance faded. Catherine moved on, as she always did. Another man who captured Catherine's heart was Grigory Potemkin. He was charismatic, intelligent, and ambitious. Potemkin became one of Catherine's most trusted advisors. He helped her with military campaigns and political strategies. Their relationship was passionate and deep, marked by letters filled with love and admiration. Catherine called him her soulmate. Potemkin was not just a lover, but also a partner in her vision for Russia. Together, they planned reforms, built cities, and expanded the empire. Their connection was strong, even when they were apart. Catherine once wrote to him, "You are always in my thoughts, even when we are far away." But love in the royal court was never simple. Catherine's relationships often sparked jealousy and tension. Some nobles tried to use her companions against her. They spread rumors to weaken her reputation. They hoped to create divisions between Catherine and her allies. But Catherine saw through their schemes. She was a skilled politician and knew how to protect herself. The public also had opinions about Catherine's personal life. Some admired her independence. They saw her as a strong woman who lived on her own terms. Others criticized her, saying she was too free with her affections. The rumors grew louder, and the stories became more scandalous. But Catherine did not let this stop her. Let them talk, she thought. I have work to do. Catherine's approach to love reflected her beliefs about freedom and choice. She once said, "A heart that loves is always young." To her, love was a source of joy and inspiration. It gave her strength during difficult times. But she never allowed it to control her. Catherine remained focused on her role as empress. One of the most persistent rumors about Catherine involved her so-called favorites. These were men who held her affection for a time. Some were young and handsome, others were wise and experienced. Catherine was generous with her favorites, giving them gifts and titles. But she also expected loyalty and respect in return. When the relationships ended, she often remained friends with them. Catherine's choices in love shocked many people. In 18th century Europe, women were expected to be quiet and obedient. But Catherine was different. She was bold and confident. She believed that her personal happiness was as important as her political duties. This made her stand out as a unique and modern leader. One winter evening, Catherine attended a grand ball at the Winter Palace. The room sparkled with candlelight, and the music filled the air. Catherine danced with several young men, laughing and enjoying herself. Nobles watched her every move, whispering behind their fans. "Look at her," they said. "Doesn't she care what people think?" But Catherine smiled and continued to dance. She would not let their judgment ruin her joy. Despite the gossip, Catherine's leadership remained strong. She continued to focus on her reforms and military campaigns. Her personal life did not distract her from her duties. In fact, her relationships often gave her valuable insights and connections. She used these to strengthen her position as empress. One of the most emotional moments in Catherine's life came when she wrote about her loneliness. In a letter to a close friend, she admitted, "The crown is heavy and the heart is lonely." Even with her many companions, Catherine sometimes felt isolated. The responsibility of ruling an empire made her different from everyone else. She longed for someone who could truly understand her. Yet Catherine never let loneliness defeat her. She filled her life with learning, writing, and building. She created art collections, supported scientists, and corresponded with great thinkers of her time. Her heart was open to love, but her mind was always on Russia. As Catherine grew older, the rumors about her continued. New generations of nobles whispered the same stories, adding their own twists. But Catherine's legacy as a ruler remained undeniable. She had expanded Russia's borders, improved its cities, and brought new ideas to its people. Her personal life was colorful, but it did not define her. In her later years, Catherine reflected on her journey. She thought about the men who had shared her life, the joys they brought, and the challenges they faced together. She smiled at the memories, but felt no regrets. I lived as I wished, she thought, and I ruled as I needed to. Love and scandal had followed Catherine throughout her life, but she remained true to herself. She balanced her emotions with her responsibilities, proving that a leader could be both human and strong. Catherine's story inspired many, showing that greatness often comes with complexity. As the lights of St. Petersburg twinkled in the distance, Catherine felt at peace. The whispers of the court grew quieter, but her achievements echoed louder. She was not just a woman who loved. She was Catherine the Great, the Empress of Russia. Chapter 8. War and Triumph. Catherine's reign was a time of great change and challenges. Russia faced wars on many fronts. These wars tested Catherine's leadership and the strength of her empire. Yet they also brought victories that made her people call her great. In 1768, a war began between Russia and the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans controlled lands to the south. Catherine saw an opportunity to expand Russia's borders. She believed the Black Sea was vital for trade and security. Winning the war would give Russia access to warm water ports. It would also make Russia a stronger power in Europe. Catherine was not a soldier, but she was a skilled leader. She worked closely with her generals, discussing strategies and plans. One of her most trusted commanders was Grigory Potemkin. He was intelligent and brave. Catherine relied on him to lead the army and inspire the troops. This war is not just about land, she told him. It is about Russia's future. The war was long and hard. Russian soldiers faced harsh conditions. The winters were cold and supplies were often scarce. But the troops fought with courage. They won key battles, pushing the Ottoman forces back. One of the greatest victories came in 1770 at the Battle of Chesme. The Russian Navy destroyed the Ottoman fleet, gaining control of the Black Sea. The news of this victory spread quickly. The people cheered Catherine's name. But war was not only about glory. It brought pain and loss. Many soldiers died in battle, far from their homes. Families mourned their loved ones. Catherine understood this pain. She wrote letters to families who had lost sons and husbands, offering her condolences. Their sacrifice was not in vain, she said. They fought for Russia. As the war continued, Catherine faced challenges at home. The nobles demanded more privileges, and some questioned the cost of the war. Catherine had to balance their demands with the needs of her people. She listened carefully and made decisions that kept the empire stable. Her ability to lead during difficult times earned her respect. In 1774, the war ended with the Treaty of Kuchuk-Kainarka. Russia emerged victorious. The treaty gave Russia access to the Black Sea and new territories in the south. It also allowed Russian ships to sail freely through the Turkish Straits. This was a major achievement. Catherine had secured Russia's position as a great power. The victories brought Catherine more than land. They brought her fame across Europe. Other rulers admired her determination and strength. They began to see Russia as a nation to respect and fear. Catherine felt proud, but also cautious. She knew that success in war could create new enemies. Despite the triumphs, the war left scars. The people were tired, and the economy was strained. Catherine worked to rebuild. She focused on helping farmers and improving trade. She also built new cities in the territories Russia had gained. These cities became centers of culture and commerce. One of the most famous was Sevastopol, a port on the Black Sea. Catherine continued to face conflicts throughout her reign. In 1787, war broke out again with the Ottoman Empire. Once more, Catherine's leadership was tested. This time, the stakes were even higher. Other European powers watched closely, waiting to see if Catherine could win again. During this second war, Catherine and Potemkin worked closely together. Potemkin oversaw the building of defenses and organized the army. Catherine provided the vision and motivation. She sent messages to her troops, reminding them of their duty. "Russia depends on your courage," she wrote. "Fight with honor, and victory will be ours." The war was brutal, with battles fought on land and sea. The Russian army advanced steadily, capturing important fortresses. The Navy also played a key role, defeating Ottoman ships and securing control of the Black Sea. By 1792, the war ended in another Russian victory. Catherine's empire had grown even larger. These wars showed Catherine's strength as a leader. She was not afraid to take risks, but she also cared deeply about her people. She understood the cost of war and worked hard to bring peace when the fighting was over. Her vision for Russia was always clear: a strong, united empire. But Catherine knew that keeping the empire united was not easy. The new territories were diverse, with many different cultures and religions. Catherine believed in tolerance and worked to integrate these regions into Russia. She respected their traditions while introducing Russian laws and governance. This approach helped maintain peace, but required constant effort. Catherine also faced threats from within. Some groups in Russia were unhappy with her rule. They wanted more power or opposed her reforms. One of the most serious challenges came during the Pugachev Rebellion in 1773. A man named Yemelyan Pugachev claimed to be the rightful Tsar. He gathered followers and led a revolt against Catherine's government. The rebellion spread quickly, causing chaos in the countryside. Pugachev's forces attacked towns and villages, killing nobles and officials. Catherine acted swiftly. She sent her army to crush the rebellion. After months of fighting, Pugachev was captured and executed. The rebellion ended, but it showed Catherine the dangers of unrest. These experiences taught Catherine valuable lessons. She learned that ruling an empire required both strength and wisdom. She worked to keep her people loyal while protecting Russia's borders. Her leadership during times of war and conflict solidified her reputation as a great ruler. By the end of her reign, Catherine's empire was vast. It stretched from the Baltic Sea in the west to the Pacific Ocean in the east. Her victories in war had expanded Russia's territory and secured its place as a major power. The people called her Catherine the Great, a title she had earned through determination and vision. Yet, Catherine often reflected on the cost of her achievements. She thought about the soldiers who had fought and died. She remembered the families who had suffered and the challenges she had faced. Greatness comes with a price, she once said. But I have done my best for Russia. As Catherine looked out over her empire, she felt both pride and humility. The wars had brought triumph, but they had also brought lessons. Catherine knew her story was not just about battles won. It was about the courage to lead, the wisdom to unite, and the vision to build a lasting legacy. Chapter 9. A Vision for Russia. Catherine dreamed of transforming Russia. She wanted it to be modern and strong, like the great powers of Europe. To achieve this, she worked tirelessly, introducing new ideas and creating lasting change. Her vision was bold, but not everyone shared her dreams. Catherine believed education was the key to progress. She wanted more schools so children could learn. In 1764, she founded the Smolny Institute for Noble Girls, the first school for women in Russia. It was a groundbreaking idea. Catherine believed educated women could help improve society. She also worked to create schools for boys, focusing on reading, writing, and practical skills. An educated nation is a strong nation, she often said. Books and libraries were another part of Catherine's vision. She loved reading and believed knowledge could change lives. She built libraries and filled them with books from across Europe. She invited writers and philosophers to her court, encouraging them to share their ideas. Voltaire, a famous French thinker, was one of her favorite correspondents. They exchanged letters about philosophy, politics, and reform. Catherine admired his ideas, but knew that change in Russia would not be easy. Catherine also focused on improving cities. St. Petersburg, the capital, grew under her rule. She built grand buildings, clean streets, and new canals. She wanted the city to reflect Russia's strength and culture. In the south, she established new cities like Odessa and Sevastopol. These places became symbols of her vision, blending beauty and practicality. One of Catherine's most ambitious projects was the Legislative Commission in 1767. She called representatives from across Russia to discuss new laws. The commission included nobles, merchants, and even peasants. Catherine wanted fair laws for everyone, not just the wealthy. She wrote a guide for the commission called the Nakaz. It was filled with ideas about justice, equality, and good governance. The Nakaz shocked many nobles. They thought it gave too much power to common people. Some accused Catherine of being too influenced by Western ideas. The commission ended without major changes, but it showed Catherine's desire to listen and learn. She kept the lessons from the commission in her mind as she worked on other reforms. Not everyone welcomed Catherine's changes. Some nobles resisted, fearing they would lose their power. Others spread rumors, calling her ideas dangerous. The peasants, too, were restless. Many lived in poverty, tied to the land as serfs. They hoped Catherine would free them, but she needed the nobles' support to rule. This created tension that never fully went away. In 1773, a revolt tested Catherine's leadership. Yemelyan Pugachev, a former soldier, claimed to be Peter III, Catherine's late husband. He promised freedom to the serfs and gathered a large following. His army attacked villages, burned estates, and killed nobles. The rebellion spread fear across Russia. Catherine acted quickly. She sent her army to crush the revolt. The fighting was brutal and lasted over a year. When Pugachev was captured, he was executed in Moscow as a warning to others. The rebellion ended, but it left scars. Catherine knew she needed to address the people's suffering. A ruler cannot ignore the cries of her people, she said. After the rebellion, Catherine focused on rebuilding trust. She introduced measures to improve farming and reduce taxes in some areas. She encouraged new industries, hoping to create jobs and wealth. These efforts helped, but the deep divide between the rich and poor remained a challenge. Catherine's reforms extended to health and science. She promoted vaccination against smallpox, a deadly disease. In 1768, she even took the vaccine herself to show it was safe. Her bravery inspired others to follow her example, saving countless lives. Catherine also supported hospitals and encouraged doctors to study medicine. Despite her efforts, Catherine faced criticism. Some nobles accused her of being too ambitious. Foreign leaders envied her success and spread false stories. Even some of her advisors questioned her choices. Catherine listened carefully to their concerns, but stayed true to her vision. "I will not be swayed by fear," she said. "Russia deserves a brighter future." Catherine's passion for art and culture also shaped her legacy. She collected paintings, sculptures, and artifacts from around the world. These treasures formed the foundation of the Hermitage Museum, which remains one of the greatest museums in the world today. Catherine believed art could inspire people and show the greatness of Russia. But Catherine's vision came at a cost. She worked long hours, often late into the night. Her letters and journals reveal moments of doubt and exhaustion. "The weight of the crown is heavy," she wrote to a friend. "But I cannot stop. There is so much to do." One of her most emotional challenges came from the nobles' resistance. Catherine wanted to end corruption and make the government more efficient. Some nobles, however, preferred the old ways. They used their influence to block her reforms. Catherine felt frustrated, but remained determined. She found allies among younger, more open-minded nobles who shared her vision. Catherine also dealt with pressure from outside Russia. Other European powers watched her closely, often criticizing her changes, but Catherine used diplomacy to maintain peace. She worked to keep Russia strong while avoiding unnecessary wars. Her skillful leadership earned her respect, even from her critics. Through it all, Catherine never lost sight of her goal. She wanted to leave Russia stronger, smarter, and more united. She knew she would not see all her dreams come true, but she believed in laying the foundation for the future. "A ruler plants seeds," she said. "The harvest will come long after we are gone." As Catherine walked through the halls of her palace one evening, she thought about her journey. She had come to Russia as a young girl, full of dreams. Now she was an empress, shaping the destiny of a vast empire. Her vision had faced resistance, but it had also brought progress. She felt proud of what she had achieved, even as she looked ahead to the challenges still to come. Catherine's vision for Russia was one of knowledge, fairness, and growth. She believed in the power of ideas and the strength of her people. Her reign was not perfect, but it was guided by a deep love for the country she called home. Catherine's dream of a modern Russia became her life's work, inspiring generations to come. Chapter 10. The People's Revolt. In 1773, whispers of rebellion spread across Russia. A man named Yemelyan Pugachev claimed he was the rightful ruler, Peter III. He declared that he had escaped assassination and returned to free the peasants. Many believed his words. The peasants, tired of their hard lives, saw him as a savior. They were desperate for change. Most of the peasants were serfs, tied to the land they farmed. They worked long hours for little in return. Hunger, taxes, and cruel landlords made their lives unbearable. Pugachev promised freedom. He told them they would no longer be slaves to the nobles. His words gave them hope, and his army grew. At first, the revolt seemed small. Catherine's advisors told her it would pass quickly. "The peasants are angry," they said, "but they cannot fight the empire." Catherine listened, but remained cautious. She had ruled long enough to know that even small sparks could cause big fires. Soon, news of the rebellion reached the palace. Pugachev's forces were attacking villages and burning estates. Nobles fled their homes in fear. The rebels grew bolder, marching from one town to the next. They killed landlords and freed other serfs. What began as a small uprising had become a dangerous movement. Catherine realized the situation was serious. She called her generals to a meeting. They discussed strategies to stop the rebels. Catherine knew she had to act quickly, but she also wanted to understand why the peasants were so angry. "We cannot crush this rebellion without addressing its cause," she said. The rebellion reached its peak in the winter of 1774. Pugachev's forces attacked Kazan, a key city. Fires burned through the streets, and the people cried out for help. Catherine's army fought back fiercely, but the battle was devastating. Kazan was left in ruins. The scars of the rebellion were visible everywhere. Catherine felt the weight of the revolt. She knew she had to make a strong decision. The rebellion could not continue. she ordered her generals to capture Pugachev and end the uprising. It was a difficult choice, but Catherine believed it was necessary to protect the empire. The final confrontation came in the autumn of 1774. Catherine's forces surrounded Pugachev's army near the Volga River. The rebels, outnumbered and poorly armed, stood no chance. Pugachev was betrayed by his own men, who handed him over to the government. The rebellion was over, but the pain it caused remained. Pugachev was taken to Moscow and publicly executed. His death was meant to send a message. Rebellion would not be tolerated. Catherine hoped this would restore order, but the revolt had left deep wounds. Thousands of peasants had died, and many villages lay in ashes. The nobles, too, were shaken. They demanded more protection from future uprisings. Catherine reflected on what had happened. She knew the rebellion was not just about Pugachev's lies. It was about the suffering of the people. The serfs lived in poverty, with little hope for a better life. Catherine felt torn. She wanted to help, but she also needed the nobles' support to rule. This was her greatest challenge. In the years after the revolt, Catherine worked to improve conditions for the peasants. She encouraged better farming methods and gave incentives to landowners to treat their workers more fairly. She also reduced taxes in some areas, hoping to ease the burden on the poor. These efforts helped, but they were not enough to solve the deeper problems. Catherine faced criticism from all sides. Some nobles accused her of being too lenient with the peasants. Others said she cared more about power than people. The peasants themselves remained distrustful. They had hoped for freedom, but their lives changed little. Catherine knew that change took time, but time was not on her side. Despite the challenges, Catherine did not lose hope. She continued to focus on education and infrastructure. She believed that a stronger economy and better knowledge would eventually improve everyone's lives. The roots of a great tree grow slowly, she said, but they make the tree strong. The rebellion also changed how Catherine viewed her role as ruler. She realized that she could not ignore the struggles of her people. She needed to find ways to bring unity to the empire. This was no easy task. Russia was vast, with many different cultures, languages, and classes. Keeping it united required both strength and wisdom. Catherine often thought about the faces she had seen during the rebellion. She remembered the fear in the eyes of the nobles and the anger of the peasants. She carried these memories with her as she made decisions for the future. A ruler must listen, she wrote in her journal, even to the voices that shout against her. As the years passed, the scars of the rebellion began to fade. The cities rebuilt, and the countryside grew quieter. But the lessons of the revolt stayed with Catherine. She worked to strengthen the government, reduce corruption, and promote fairness. These efforts helped to prevent future uprisings, but the divide between the rich and poor remained a challenge. Catherine's response to the rebellion showed both her strength and her humanity. She was firm when she needed to be, But she never stopped caring about her people. The revolt tested her leadership, and she emerged wiser. She understood that ruling an empire was not just about power. It was about responsibility and compassion. In the quiet of her study, Catherine often reflected on the rebellion. She thought about the choices she had made and the lives that had been lost. She knew she could not fix every problem, but she promised herself to keep trying. "I am only one person," she said, "but I can still make a difference." The rebellion of 1773 was one of the darkest moments of Catherine's reign. It showed the cracks in the empire and the struggles of its people. But it also revealed Catherine's determination to lead. She faced the chaos with courage and used the lessons of the revolt to guide her vision for Russia. As Catherine looked out over the vast lands of her empire, she felt a mix of sorrow and hope. The rebellion had tested her, but it had also strengthened her resolve. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, but she was ready to face it. Russia was her responsibility, and she would not give up. Chapter 11. Age and Reflection. Catherine was no longer young. She had ruled Russia for many years. Her hair, once dark, now had streaks of silver. Her face showed lines of worry and wisdom, but her spirit was strong. She still woke early, worked long hours, and thought deeply about the future of her empire. As Catherine grew older, she often reflected on her life. She thought about the young girl who had arrived in Russia, full of dreams and fears. She had faced many challenges: an unhappy marriage, a dangerous coup, and years of hard decisions. Yet, she had risen above them. "I have done much," she thought, "but what will be remembered?" Catherine's achievements were remarkable. She had expanded Russia's borders, making it one of the largest empires in the world. She had reformed laws, improved cities, and promoted education. She had brought art, science, and philosophy to her court, making it a center of culture. Many called her Catherine the Great, a title she had earned through hard work and vision. But Catherine also knew that not everyone admired her. Some saw her as too ambitious. They accused her of caring more about power than people. Others called her cruel because of the rebellions she had crushed and the struggles of the serfs. These criticisms troubled her. "Have I been too harsh?" she wondered. "Or is this the price of leadership?" In her later years, Catherine spent more time writing. She kept journals where she recorded her thoughts, fears, and hopes. These pages were filled with questions about her legacy. "Will history judge me kindly," she wrote, "or will it see only my mistakes?" Catherine also wrote letters to friends and advisors. In one letter, she confessed, "The crown is heavy. It is not just gold. It is made of the worries of millions of people." She felt the weight of her responsibility every day. Even as she grew older, she continued to work tirelessly for her people. One evening, Catherine sat by the fireplace in her study. The room was quiet, except for the crackling of the fire. She thought about her enemies. Some had plotted against her in secret, hoping to take her throne. Others had spoken openly against her reforms. Yet Catherine had outlived most of them. She had faced betrayal and survived. Perhaps this is what it means to rule, she thought. To stand firm even when others wish you to fall. Catherine's health began to show signs of decline. She felt tired more often and sometimes struggled with pain. Her doctors urged her to rest, but Catherine refused to slow down. She believed she still had work to do. "There's always more to build," she said, "always more to improve." As she aged, Catherine became more reflective. She often thought about her children and grandchildren. Her son Paul had grown up in her shadow. Their relationship was complicated. Paul resented Catherine's power and the way she had kept him from ruling. Catherine worried about what kind of leader he would be. "Will he carry on my work?" she wondered. "Or undo it?" Catherine found joy in her grandchildren. She spent time teaching them and telling them stories. She hoped they would grow into wise and kind leaders. They were her hope for the future, a way to carry her legacy forward. Catherine also reflected on her personal life. She thought about the people who had shared her journey, her lovers, advisors, and friends. Some had stayed loyal until the end. Others had left or betrayed her. These memories brought both happiness and sadness. "I have loved and been loved," she wrote, "but love has never been simple." One of Catherine's favorite places was the palace gardens. Even as her strength faded, she often walked among the trees and flowers. She found peace there, away from the noise of court. She would sit on a bench, watching the sunset, and think about the past. "How far I have come," she thought, "and how far Russia has come with me." Despite her accomplishments, Catherine worried about the future. She knew her reforms were not complete. The serfs were still tied to the land, and the gap between rich and poor remained wide. She hoped her successors would continue her work, but she knew there were no guarantees. "A ruler can only plant the seeds," she said. "Others must help them grow." Catherine also thought about the legacy of women in power. She had ruled with strength and intelligence, proving that a woman could lead an empire. Yet, she knew her path had been difficult. She hoped her story would inspire others, showing that courage and determination could overcome obstacles. In her final days, Catherine continued to work. She read reports, wrote letters, and met with advisors. She spoke about new projects and plans, always thinking ahead. But her body grew weaker. One morning in November 1796, Catherine suffered a stroke. She was found unconscious in her study, surrounded by papers and books. She passed away the next day. The news of Catherine's death spread quickly. Across Russia, people mourned. Some remembered her as a strong and wise ruler who had made their country great. Others spoke of the struggles they still faced. But everyone agreed on one thing. Catherine had left a mark on history. After her death, Catherine's son Paul became emperor. He reversed some of her policies, but her influence remained strong. The cities she built, the reforms she started, and the ideas she promoted continued to shape Russia for years to come. Today, Catherine the Great is remembered as one of the most remarkable rulers in history. Her reign was not perfect, but it was driven by a deep love for her country. She dreamed of a modern, enlightened Russia and worked tirelessly to make that dream a reality. As we look back on Catherine's life, we see a woman of strength, intelligence, and vision. She faced enemies, made mistakes, and carried the weight of an empire. Yet, she never stopped striving for greatness. Her story is one of courage, resilience, and the power of dreams. Chapter 12. A Legacy of Power. Catherine the Great passed away on November 17, 1796. She had ruled Russia for 34 years, leaving behind a vast and powerful empire. Her life was one of ambition, drama, and vision. She had risen from a young girl with dreams to one of the most remarkable leaders in history. But what would her legacy be? Catherine's reign changed Russia forever. Under her leadership, the empire expanded its borders. She added new lands in the south and west, making Russia one of the largest countries in the world. These territories brought wealth and resources, strengthening the empire's economy. They also increased Russia's influence in Europe and Asia. Her victories in war played a big part in her success. Catherine's armies defeated the Ottoman Empire and other rivals. These battles were not easy, and many lives were lost, but they secured Russia's position as a great power. The ports she gained on the Black Sea helped Russia trade with other nations, bringing prosperity. Catherine also worked to modernize Russia. She wanted it to be a country of learning, art, and progress. She built schools, libraries, and hospitals. She invited philosophers, scientists, and artists to her court. Her palace became a center of culture. Catherine believed that education and knowledge could improve society. A nation's strength comes from the minds of its people, she often said. One of her most lasting achievements was her role in creating the Hermitage Museum. Catherine loved art and collected thousands of paintings, sculptures, and books. These treasures became part of the Hermitage, which is now one of the greatest museums in the world. Her passion for beauty and learning lives on through this collection. But Catherine's reign was not without criticism. Many people admired her, but others saw her differently. Some nobles thought she gave too much power to common people. Others believed she cared more about her image than her people. The serfs, who made up most of Russia's population, continued to live hard lives. Catherine's reforms did little to change their suffering. The Pugachev Rebellion of 1773 showed the deep divisions in Russian society. It was a reminder that not everyone benefited from Catherine's rule. After the rebellion, Catherine focused on maintaining order. She strengthened the power of the nobles, hoping they would support her. This decision left the serfs feeling abandoned. Despite these challenges, Catherine's achievements were undeniable. She was a visionary who believed in progress. She wanted Russia to be strong and respected. Her reforms, though imperfect, set the stage for future changes. Historians often debate her legacy, but many agree that she was one of the most important rulers of her time. Catherine's personal life also added to her story. She had many close relationships, both romantic and political. These relationships brought her joy, but also created scandals. People whispered about her lovers and her generosity toward them. Catherine didn't hide her emotions, which made her both admired and criticized. She lived boldly, unafraid of what others thought. Her death marked the end of an era. Catherine had prepared for the future by planning a smooth transition of power. Her son, Paul, became emperor after her. But their relationship had been strained. Paul often felt overshadowed by his mother. After her death, he changed some of her policies, trying to make his own mark. Still, Catherine's influence could not be erased. Even after her death, Catherine's story continued to inspire people. She was a symbol of strength and determination. Many rulers in Europe admired her leadership. Women, in particular, saw her as proof that they could lead with wisdom and power. Her life showed that ambition and intelligence could break barriers. Catherine's legacy also lived on in the cities and institutions she built. St. Petersburg, her beloved capital, reflected her vision. Its grand palaces, bridges, and streets were a testament to her love for beauty and order. The cities she founded in the south became centers of trade and culture. Her impact could be seen in every corner of the empire. In her later years, Catherine wrote about her hopes for Russia. She dreamed of a nation that was educated, prosperous, and united. She knew this dream would take time. "I have planted the seeds," she said. "It is up to others to help them grow." Her words showed her belief in the future. Catherine's life was not perfect, and neither was her reign. She made mistakes and faced criticism. But she never stopped trying to make Russia better. She believed in her vision and worked tirelessly to achieve it. Her courage and resilience inspired those around her. Today, Catherine the Great is remembered as one of history's most powerful and fascinating figures. Her story is told in books, plays, and films. Her accomplishments continue to shape Russia and the world. She remains a symbol of what is possible when determination meets opportunity. As we look back on Catherine's life, we see a leader who dared to dream big. She faced challenges with courage and turned obstacles into opportunities. Her ambition and intelligence left a lasting mark on history. Catherine's story is not just about power. It is about vision, perseverance, and the ability to inspire others. Her journey, from a young girl in Germany to the Empress of Russia, is a reminder that greatness is not born, it is earned. Catherine's reign showed that one person can make a difference, even in the face of doubt and adversity. Her legacy is a testament to the power of vision and the strength of a determined heart. Catherine the Great may be gone, but her story lives on. It is a story of courage, love, and ambition. It is a story of a woman who changed the course of history, and it is a story that will continue to inspire for generations to come.